Hi everyone, welcome to Sunny Day Discussions. I am Sunny Day. Today I want to talk about the rights to protest. The Supreme Court declined to hear a case called McKesson v. Doe. This could have affirmed that the First Amendment protected protest organizers from being held liable for the illegal acts committed by others, either attending the protest or sabotaging the protest. Every protest brings in saboteurs, right or left, doesn't matter. There's always going to be that element of mischief that's just there to cause trouble. So by not taking this case, it lets stand a ruling by the Fifth Circuit that states that the protest organizers can be held liable for the mischief and violence caused by others. So if you think of it like this, say there's a pro-life movement and some pro-choice organizers came in, or not organizers, protesters, counter-protesters came in and started picking fights, causing vandalism. That would be the organizer of the pro-life movement would be held liable for those agitators that came in to cause trouble. And vice versa, if there's a Black Lives Matter protest and far-right people came in and started causing mischief, the organizers of the Black Lives Matter protest would be held liable. So McKesson v. Doe stems from an incident that occurred during 2016 protest about the killing of Anton Sterling by Baton Rouge, Louisiana police. An unknown individual threw a rock or a brick-like object at a police officer, causing substantial injury. The officer claims that McKesson, the protest organizer, should be held liable for the injuries suffered, although he does not claim that McKesson knew or condoned the throwing of the object or knew anything about it. So the argument being that he should have known an assault could occur. But that could theoretically be applied everywhere. So you're at a music festival, someone gets assaulted. Do you sue the organizers of the music festival because they could have assumed that an assault could happen? Walmart, there's assaults that happen in Walmart all the time. Should you sue Walmart because they should have assumed that an assault could happen? So that just seems like a silly argument to stand on, but the ACLU has argued that this standard of liability violates the First Amendment. The Fifth Circuit Court, after years of back and forth, disagreed. Justice Sotomayor wrote a statement accompanying the denial by the Supreme Court, saying the Supreme Court has already settled this question, so the law is not in need of further clarification. Sotomayor explains that in 2023, shortly after the Fifth Circuit's decision, the SCOTUS issued an opinion in Counterman v. Colorado, where it confirmed that negligence is never a sufficient basis for imposing liability on political expression and association. It made it explicitly clear that when it comes to drawing the line between unprotected incitement and the kinds of, quote, strong protests against the government and prevailing social order that lie at the heart of the First Amendment, a showing of intent is required. Sotomayor concluded that in her statement by acknowledging that the Fifth Circuit did not have the benefits of the SCOTUS's recent decision. However, they do now and are expected to fully apply that decision in future proceedings. As of the 22nd of April, the Fifth Circuit Court ruling still stands. Now, let's get into the protests that are currently happening on campuses all over the world. Now, Ground Zero seems to have started in America at Columbia University, that started, and police were called, and over 100 protesters were arrested. And that just completely spurred a rise in these protests across the nation. The students are calling for universities to separate themselves from any companies that are advancing Israel's military efforts against Gaza. Most of the protests are instigated largely by independent groups, though students say they are inspired by their peers. At Columbia University, anti-war protesters set up a tent encampment last week. The police first tried to clear the encampment on April 18th when they arrested more than 100 protesters. This move backfired spectacularly. It inspired students across the country and motivated the protesters at Columbia to regroup and come back. On Friday, the students said they reached an impasse with administrators and intended to continue their encampment until their demands are met. Columbia's president, Minouche Shafik, I'm sorry if I'm butchering that, faced significant rebuke from faculty. Although it was largely symbolic, I believe that they joined the students in their protest. The trustees remain supportive of I can't pronounce that. They are the people with the power to hire and fire the president, but a report by the University Senate's Executive Committee that represents the faculty found that Shafik took many actions and decisions that have harmed Columbia University, including calling the police on the protesters. Now, in Northeastern University in Boston, police in riot gear cleared an encampment on the campus in Boston. The scene was largely non-confrontational. The school claims that the demonstration had been infiltrated by professional organizers with no affiliation to the school, claiming that they were anti-Semitic slurs being used. However, students say otherwise, and claim that the protests were peaceful and organized by students, and the vast majority of people participating were students. And video shows counter-protesters holding an Israeli flag and chanting "Kill the Jews," kind of debunking the president's claims on that, the administration's claims on that. Now, USC in LA, University of Southern California. LA police arrived in riot gear at USC on Wednesday, arresting 93 people on trespassing charges. As they cleared an encampment, the demonstrators shouted, "Shame on you," as police took people away. The protests remained largely peaceful, but grew tense when officers arrived. USC admin said it had closed the gates to campus and was instituting an ID check to make sure only university-affiliated individuals were allowed in. Ohio State University, 36 people were arrested during the protest, calling for an end to investment in Israel and the war. Students voiced support for the protesters and said the actions of law enforcement made them feel less trustful of them. Hundreds of Ohio State students, employees, and community members attended the protests. And Ohio Rep. Munira Yassin Abdullahi, I'm sorry again if I'm butchering that, she represents the 9th District, participated in the protest, stating that what she witnessed and how she and other demonstrators were treated was horrific and remains to be both physically and mentally painful. In a prepared release, Abdullahi said, "They surrounded us at a moment when we were supporting students who were conducting prayer. I was grabbed by my headscarf. I was pushed towards the ground onto students. I believe there was absolutely no reason for the police to respond the way they did. We posed no threat to them or anyone else. We were simply making our voices heard for millions of Palestinians who have no voice of their own right now." And again, students said they are now less likely to trust the police. George Washington University in Washington, D.C. has begun suspending students for their participation. Now, the D.C. police neglected or rejected the request to come and clear the encampment, concerned about how it would look to have police come and take on a small peaceful protest. And so, of course, then the campus was like, well, we have to do something, so we're going to suspend them all. Other campus protests include California State Polytech University in Humboldt, New York University, Emory University in Atlanta, Northwestern University in Chicago, Fashion Institute of Technology in New York, Indiana University Bloomington, University of Pennsylvania, University of Florida, Arizona State University. Now, it's not just in the States that this is all occurring. It's happening all over the world. There's something like 4,000 protests that are happening globally in countries across the globe. There are pro-Israeli demonstrations as well, but it far outweighs the anti-war protests that are occurring. Now, the media and obviously the administration of these universities are trying to claim that these anti-war protesters are anti-Semitic. And by their saying that they want a ceasefire, they want peace and a resolution to end this war, that they are being anti-Semitic and slamming Jews and wishing for the decimation of Jews, just completely misrepresenting the stance that they're actually taking. And that stance is just to end the war, you know? Tens of thousands of innocent Palestinians are dying and have died. And there's been mass graves uncovered from Palestinians who were buried. The count can no longer be completed because there are so many bodies buried under rubble and in graves that no one knows about. And it's just kind of rich to see conservatives and corporate Democrats and the media try to claim that these student protests and anyone who stands with Palestine is anti-Israel and anti-Semitic, when in fact there are Jewish Voices for Peace are taking part in multiple of these events across the country. There are Holocaust survivors, the descendants of Holocaust survivors, that are standing with these pro-Palestinian anti-war protests. But because the older generations mostly, in corporations, corporate media, corporate Democrats, have been brainwashed to think that Israel is this special place that cannot be disparaged or talked back to, that can basically do whatever they want and have full support. And anyone who stands against that is anti-Semitic. And it's just a ridiculous claim. When you have, and they all say October 7th, you know, that was atrocious. We all agree that it was atrocious, should never have happened. Something like 1,700 Israelis died. And it was terrible. But in their retaliation, they're causing a genocide. And yes, it is a genocide. And there is famine. And for some reason, conservative media, conservatives, corporate media, Democrats, Biden, tend to always go back to October 7th to justify what Israel is doing now. And I watched an interview with an Israeli soldier, and he actually said that IDF see all Palestinians as Hamas. So when Israel is actually saying that they're trying to only get Hamas and they're trying to minimize the civilian casualties, what they're saying is that they don't see civilians, they see Hamas. And so every death that they have committed, every murder that they have committed has been because they see all Palestinians as Hamas. And that's very obvious in the way they portray themselves in the media and the way they bash people who stand up against them. And enough on that, because I could go on for hours, but I want to get back to the campuses and the protests on the campuses and how the presidents of these universities are trying to silence free speech. Now, this is history repeating itself. The 60s anti-war protests from Vietnam. And this tends to happen when you have an establishment that is afraid that their reign, I guess, is in jeopardy because the youth no longer see the world the way that the establishment does. And so they try to quash it. They stifle it. But that didn't work then, and it's not working now. Like I said, the the 100 protesters arrested in New York at Columbia spurred a whole slew of more protests across the country. So the more they push back and try to silence, the more these protests are going to rise up. And there's nothing they can do about it. And that scares them because their time is coming to an end. Their ideas and views on the world and on Israel are outdated. More and more people are seeing Israel for what it is, and they're speaking out. So anyway, that's all I have for you today. Like, share, subscribe, vote, no matter how big, how small, how inconsequential, your vote matters, and read everything you can get your hands on. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.